is Americana in Sicily. The Italian visa application process. ChatGPT says that I should start by sharing my initial excitement when first starting this visa application process. However, I think that dealing with the bureaucracy of the Italian immigration system, the words that really come to mind are dread and frustration. Those are truly probably more accurate descriptors. Buying a home in Italy does not automatically guarantee that you can stay and live in Italy. As a US citizen, we are limited to 90 days in a 180-day period, which means if you want to stay longer, you need a visa. I started the visa research process about a year ago, and the Italians, they are great at many, many things, but efficiency, clarity, and ensuring that everyone involved in the process actually understands and knows about the process, that is just not one of their strengths. Even the immigration website doesn't have all of the information, and there are multiple Italian consulates throughout the United States that are dependent upon which state you live in. They all have different information, different forms, and different processes. So waiting through and trying to understand all of the visa information was really challenge number one in this process. Initially, I was really optimistic and I had convinced myself that I could navigate the whole process by myself. And so I started gathering all of my materials in probably October. And by December, I attempted to submit my packet and I had everything ready. But then I got to the final submission where you have to submit a digital signature that only someone within Italy can actually initiate. And at that point, I was stuck. So I did more research on some of the Facebook expat groups that I'm part of and ended up connecting with this wonderful woman named Laura who had applied, her family had applied for the same visa, and she also had kids. So she understood this process really from the same perspective that I was trying to get at it from. Her advice, honestly, was to do the opposite of what they had done. And she suggested instead that I hire an Italian lawyer based in Italy to help with this process. So I took her advice and I interviewed 3 different law firms and ended up with a company, a small firm based in Florence. And because I'd already gathered the majority of those documents, they actually gave me a little discount, which was really thoughtful. But also what I learned is that even though I'd followed the information on the immigration website, I had still missed several essential pieces because they were never listed in any of the information that I could find. Really what it was is I needed an apostille for several of my documents. And an apostille is an official way to authenticate a document. And for most of my documents, I was able just to walk into the Colorado Secretary of State, and 15 minutes later, I walked out with this really lovely seal attached to those documents. So if you were ever doing this process, note to self, you need to make copies of your documents before you get the apostille because you can't remove that seal. It will invalidate it. So those local documents were fairly easy, a couple of hiccups here and there, but my FBI background check is really what was more complicated because it needed an apostille from the Washington, D.C. office, which means I had to hire a third party to handle that process. And most of them are absurdly expensive. And because of backups within the government, they were quoting between 6 to 9 weeks for turnaround time. And at that point, I panicked because it was already January and I knew that my application alone without this apostille was going to take about 90 days or more. And then I couldn't even start my daughter's process until I had all of my documents, which meant that we might not be leaving until November or December, which would really defeat the purpose of having my girls attend a local school. But then through some more research, I found this amazing service called Monument Visa Service. And it really at first seemed too good to be true. Their prices were about a quarter of the price and their turnaround time was 2 to 3 weeks. And I went with it and trusted it and they were legit and they did get my documents back to me in about 2 weeks. My lawyer submitted all of my documents for my nulla osta. So no, all of these documents are not actually for the visa application. You have to start with the nulla osta, which is a clearance document that's issued by the Italian immigration authorities that even allows a non-EU citizen to start to apply for the visa. Really, it's a pre-approval that takes about 60 days or up to 180, depending on which source you're looking at. I had no idea how long this Nulla Osta would actually take, um, but I wanted to be proactive and just think positively. So I decided to schedule myself an appointment with the Chicago consulate. That's where I'm from, Colorado, and so Colorado's consulate is designated as Chicago. But you can't actually book an appointment on the consulate website. You have to create a second account on a different website to make your appointment. I had just read too many horror stories from other people about finally getting their clearance and then not being able to get an appointment for 6 months out. So they only open up the appointment blocks several months in advance. And so I just really stalked the website until they opened up May appointments and was able to get a spot at the end of May. Just positive, optimistic thinking that all of these processes would come together. And they did. In fact, my Nulla Osta was approved in April. And once I received the approval, then I could start the process of approval for the Nulla Osta for my girls as accompanying family members. So their process was similar, but it also included different documents, especially since their dad and I are divorced and he is consenting to me leaving the country with them. So we had to have documents here first notarized and then the apostille. And then I had to send them to my lawyer to be translated into Italian. And then they had to schedule a court appointment so that those officially translated documents could be recognized by an Italian judge and then finally submitted to the immigration authorities for their approval. I am really glad that I hired the Italian attorneys because I could not have possibly done all of that on my own. But interesting enough, my girls don't technically actually need a visa. When we arrive in Italy, we need to appear at the local police station or the questura for an appointment within 8 days of our arrival and apply for this permesso di soggiorno, which is essentially a permission to stay in the country. Though when I spoke to Laura, the fantastic woman on this expat site who helped share her experience with me, she shared that this first appointment is really more like an appointment to make an appointment. And at this appointment, they give you a slip of paper with your next appointment, and you have to carry that slip of paper with you because it acts then as your official permission to stay in the country should you exceed your 90 days. And the Italians, of course, recognize this as being an official slip of paper. But for Laura's family, they arrived in September, went to the questura, and their final appointment wasn't until May. So they had to carry around that little slip of paper 4 months. And while the Italians recognize it as an official document that you may outstay your 90 days, the rest of Europe doesn't necessarily recognize that little slip of paper. That means that if they were to go to, say, France in February, much further outside of their 90 days, the French authorities could actually deport them directly from France back to the United States. Even though all of their belongings and even their pets are in Italy, they wouldn't get to go back to Italy. They'd have to go back to the United States. So I didn't want to risk that. And even though oftentimes your passport isn't checked when you travel from European country to other European countries, the reality is that it could happen and you could be deported. And really, the whole point of us being in Europe is to have access to Europe. So I wanted to ensure that my girls had their visas before we leave. So thanks to Laura's advice, I worked with my lawyers to get these visas. And that has also been a process. So their Nulla Osta, again, was supposed to take anywhere from, according to the World Wide Web, anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 months. So again, trying to be optimistic, hoping that we could actually leave when we were scheduled to leave. But the girls' Nulla Osta didn't come through until June 28th, and we were scheduled to leave on July 17th. So I immediately turned around and sent all of our documents to the Chicago consulate. And they had told us when we were there for my appointment that because we were less than 90 days from travel, that we didn't have to appear in person. I could just mail everything to them. So I did. I got everything in the mail. According to my USPS tracking, it arrived on Monday, July 1st. And I think I was optimistic in thinking that because it only took 4 days from the time of my appointment until when my visa was issued and mailed out, that maybe my girls' visas would only also take 4 days. But that is not how it turned out. One of the biggest issues is that the Italian consulate, they don't have a way of tracking, at least, or sharing tracking externally with people who apply. So there is no electronic tracking number. They do not respond to emails. I think in the last 6 months, I've sent them 5 emails and only one has been replied to. And they don't answer phone calls and you can't leave a voicemail. They are only open from 9 until 12, Monday through Friday. And so by the time July 12th rolled around and I'd not heard anything from the consulate, I had not had my USPS tracking updated. So at that point, I figured we were probably not going to be leaving on the 17th. And I went ahead and canceled our flights. So finally, my lawyer then, on Monday the 22nd, sent an official email, kind of like one of those electronic emails that requires a response. And even by the end of their business day, I had not yet heard back from the consulate. This is also days after the worldwide IT outage that really impacted so many airlines. But luckily, I had some Southwest points, so I was able to hop onto a Southwest flight that afternoon and was at the consulate when they opened Tuesday morning at 9. Now, you have to have an appointment at the consulate. And there were a couple of people ahead of me, and I came up to the line and I knew that I had to make up some type of story about something, because if I told them I was just there to check on the status of my passports and visas, I didn't think that they'd be able to talk to anybody. I think they would just send me away. So I came up with some story about how I had a priority walk-in appointment and the guard was very confused. And so he just took my passport into the back to see what this was all about. And it worked because about 15 minutes later, a woman came to the visa desk and was like, "Oh, Margaret, yes, we have your daughter's passports. We have their visas. I was just processing them and I just need to print them." She shared some other information, which essentially leads me to think that their packets and their applications did arrive right before the 4th of July. They set them to the side and thought, we'll get to this when we get back into the office. And then they were forgotten about. And they had this oh shit moment when they finally read my lawyer's email on Monday, found the packets, started processing the applications. Which, better late than never, I was able to walk out of the consulate with all of their visas in hand at 11, and I was back to the airport again to use some Southwest points to fly back to Denver. I rebooked our tickets as soon as I got back, and we are scheduled to leave about 2 weeks later than what we anticipated, but we are on our way. Although this adventure with visas and permits is still not over. Once we arrive, we have to go to the Questura, and there are already some hiccups that I'm anticipating because of the delay in these visas and reservations I had to cancel, and it's just a whole fun adventure, growth opportunity. But I will keep you all updated on our appointments and if we're allowed to stay in Italy. Thanks for joining. Ciao.